They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. But what could be said about an image that mystified everyone for generations? A drawing with a hidden meaning, accessible only through techniques that did not yet exist during the life of the artist. Here it is. Not that impressive at first sight. The artist left a void in the middle, and it's not even in color. But don't be fooled. This drawing can make you believe that the artistic and scientific minds might be two sides of the same coin. It's that magical. The story of this fascinating mystery starts here, somewhere between the island of Malta and the boundless imagination of the greatest artists. This way, please. I've always loved enigmas, secrets, mysteries. Even more so if it concerns art. In an art gallery, one must expect the unexpected. Without a doubt, it is the best place to be to dig into one of modern art's greatest mysteries, an incomplete work. Rodin, Saint-Exupéry, Blaise Pascal, Tolkien, Schubert, and so many others have left behind them uncompleted works that still manage to mesmerize our senses. Of course, no one but Schubert could play the end of his symphony, for it has remained unfinished. But in the case we're interested in, the artist was still very much alive when he decided not to complete one of his most intriguing works. How is it that a perfectionist, a master of modern perspective, could reach such a conclusion? In order to find out, we will attempt to recount Escher's artistic process, even if it means traveling back to the dawn of time.
My love for Escher, which began in 1966, developed in strange ways.
In the book Gödel, Escher, Bach, which won him the Pulitzer Prize in 1980, the famous Dr. Hofstadter clearly implied that the empty space at the center of Print Gallery would remain forever void.
The paradoxical things, they immediately captured me. Strange, unexpected things like night and day, and the shirt that I'm wearing, the two hands drawing each other, and what I call strange loops, illustrate a fascination with certain things that have fascinated mathematicians for thousands of years.
Escher is far from being the first to attempt tricking the eye through his art. 15,000 years ago, cavemen artists were striving to render a sense of reality on flat surfaces. Regardless of its form, the quest for art is most definitely what mankind can be proudest of. Modern artists have thus a very old ancestry indeed. But if today we can choose to free ourselves from the laws of perspective, things haven't always been that way. The art of creating a three-dimensional illusion on a two-dimensional surface only becomes apparent during the 15th century. With Frenchman Jean Fouquet's miniatures, the eye starts perceiving a depth that isn't actually there. The intuitive works of the first Grand Masters allowed the illusion to go further and further. Painter Jan van Eyck went as far as integrating a curved, reflecting mirror to capture the reality of the room as a whole. The idea of an image within an image, often used by Escher, already shares something with the young man glancing at himself in our lithograph. Concave mirrors, prisms, lenses, or camera obscura. It is true that artists have never hesitated to make good use of the latest gadgets. The great masters pushed the art of natural perspective as far as the naked eye allowed. Finally, in the mathematical mind of Filippo Brunelleschi was born the precision tool needed by artists for rendering depth on a flat surface. Brunelleschi made a drawing using his new vanishing point technique. He mounted it on a board with a hole in it. And with the use of a simple mirror, all could easily see how accurate the drawing was. Artificial perspective was born. But even this revolutionary mathematical tool could not help fill the taunting void at the center of Print Gallery. The answer lies elsewhere. During the Medici era, Florence sits as one of the most powerful cities in the world. All manner of talents and riches flock to this business capital, making it the cradle of the Renaissance. It is there also, in the shadow of the majestic dome erected by Brunelleschi, that the young Escher discovers the great masters that will inspire him, in particular, Leonardo da Vinci.
Western art grew out of precision. People, like Da Vinci, who of course was a scientist and an inventor and an artist.
Escher wanders into many museums, including the Uffizi Gallery, the former head offices of the Florentine Empire. He would not fail to notice that his inspiring predecessor beautifully integrated all of the most effective illusions of three-dimensionality, through aerial perspective, changing tints with growing distance, through disappearance, blurring the outlines of farther objects, and above all, through the mathematical rigor of vanishing points. While Da Vinci applied his research to refine the technique, Michelangelo allowed himself to cheat with human proportions, both for aesthetic purposes and to compensate for the extreme point of view viewers way down below would have.
Architecture is the process of building an environment.
Moshe Safdie is a playful and visionary architect whose latest work is as innovative as his first, even after a 40-year career.
The medium representing architecture is not architecture. Architecture is the environment. And as such, it's not a freewheeling, expressive pursuit.
Michelangelo was not only a great artist, but also the architect of the cupola of St. Peter's in Rome. After giving up the idea of becoming an architect, Escher decides to make Rome his home. Would there be a binding relationship then between art, architecture, and Escher's quest? Almost 500 years will pass before a young Escher decides to follow in the footsteps of his predecessors, spending hours perched here, attempting to capture a breathtaking point of view. Art or science? Emotion or technique? Does the deeper mystery of Print Gallery reside in the sacred nature of art, for which no explanation should ever be given? It's a turning point for Moritz Cornelis Escher, since extreme points of view and vanishing points will not only be an endless source of inspiration, but also the beginning of a long and passionate journey into visual paradoxes. The more Print Gallery is observed, beyond its mystery, the easier it is to believe that Escher was more concerned with visual play than aesthetics. Then again, during his numerous trips across the Mediterranean, Escher displayed a fine and clear artistic awareness.
I've come to appreciate more and more the works by Escher that do not contain any explicit paradox, in particular Castrovalva. It was a little bit unrealistic. It was very, very steep, and it looked maybe too steep to believe. But still, it was more just like a fairy tale than it was like a paradox. And I've come to see more and more his, what I would call, genuine artistry. He was a believer in the visual magic and the mathematical magic of the world. I know that he was seeing those same things in his landscapes. He just hadn't yet formulated them in the same way.
A keen sense of observation is forever present in the many illusions that made Escher famous. But he will be scorned for his relationship to mathematics. Up until the 90s, critics went so far as to try and rob Escher of his status as an artist. Art is hard to define. Yet, could it not be described as the ability to instill a human emotion into whatever medium the artist works with in such a way that others that are exposed to the work would experience something of it as well? We set out to get various artists' points of view on the question. We spoke to dancer Louise Le Cavalier, who helped revive and reinvent the world of modern dance. Denis Arcand, winner of a César in Paris and an Oscar in Hollywood. Sculptor Robert Roussil, with his aesthetic provocations that have taken the hearts of the West as well as the East, and musician Serge Fiori, whose audacious ear helped make Quebec an international musical center. Without forgetting, our architect.
If art is the use of our intuition and thought process to create constructs that enrich our life and expand it and connect it with all the many other disciplines of thought and the sciences and so on and so forth, then architecture is art.
Je pense qu'il ne peut pas en avoir une définition de l'art parce que c'est tellement vaste que c'est peut-être réducteur de vouloir le confiner dans une phrase.
C'est la communication entre deux êtres dont et l'un se reconnaît dans l'autre, ou en tout cas, il a établi une connexion avec cet autre-là. Ce qui, au fond, diminue notre solitude, qui est une des choses les plus importantes de l'art.
Pour que l'autre ressente ce que tu as fait, mais en plus, toi, ce que tu as fait soit vraiment la vérité pure, il faut que tu développes à travers les années l'art de t'enlever du chemin.
Mais le besoin de s'exprimer, c'est parce que tu accumules des choses et tu as besoin de ça. Comme dit quelqu'un, mais je peux dire en un mot, pour moi, c'est la meilleure manière de passer le temps.
Let us now see what the minds we tend to deem more rational have to say on the matter of art, emotion, and Escher.
The thing that drives any mathematician is the love of beauty.
Ces émotions-là, quand on le traduit dans le domaine de la recherche, en mathématiques ou en sciences, c'est cette notion d'élégance, si on veut. On peut dire « Ah, mais c'est joli, c'est passionnant, la façon dont les idées sont enchaînées. » Sinon, pourquoi est-ce que les humains feraient de la science s'il n'y avait pas d'émotion?
It's obviously a very subtle thing, and one of the greatest achievements or one of the greatest aspirations of humanity. I've always felt this way.
The very well-known physicist and mathematician Roger Penrose of Oxford University has a truly Escherian place in this story. Both he and his father Lionel inspired some of Escher's work.
My own acquaintance with Escher originally came from one of the international congresses of mathematicians, which took place in Amsterdam. One of my lecturers had a catalogue with one of these extraordinary pictures. I think it was Night and Day, and that was where I first saw what Escher was doing. It was completely mind-blowing, I think, what I saw there. But I think it's clear from Escher's work, and also from his notebooks, that he really had quite a very distinct aptitude in mathematics.
And if Escher is now considered one of the great contemporary artists, it is because he manages to breathe life into his intuition, using only ink and paper.
We always want to take something that somebody has done and extend it and modify it. And I think that the same is true of Escher, with many, 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 many people who are trying to do Escher-like things.
Retired in his Utrecht apartment today, Hans de Rijk has written many books concerning Escher under the pseudonym of Bruno Ernst. He was frequently in the company of Escher in the middle of the 1950s while Print Gallery was being born.
Nou, hij heeft verschrikkelijk veel moeite gedaan om dat resultaat te bereiken. Het tekenen zelf was bij hem altijd zo gebeurd. Dat was een weekje werk, het tekenen op de eerste schets, helemaal uitgewerkt, en dan het tekenen op de steen. Dat nam altijd heel korte tijd in beslag.
Escher was a secretive man. He found his inspiration at night in the course of his dreams and spent his days making them realities.
A dream is something where there is an element of consciousness. I mean, usually you think of somebody asleep as being unconscious, but that's not true when they're dreaming. There is certainly a consciousness there.
The work of intuition never ceases, night or day, until the result becomes clear to the mind. Like any real artist, Escher never stopped trying to perfect the techniques he used to express himself. Finally carved out of wood or stone, each of Escher's prints is the product of extensive research and countless sketches and studies. He never hesitated to spend hundreds of hours preparing to render as faithfully as possible what his amazing power of intuition had inspired. Meticulously engraved and printed from a heavy porous slab of stone, many consider Print Gallery to be Escher's masterpiece. This fascinating lithograph was printed for the very first time in 1956.
The mystery of the empty circle has its origin in a previous attempt at deformation. During Escher's many travels, the spectacular port of Sanglia in Malta found a place close to his heart.
Escher seems to have fallen in love with this isle, many thousands of years old, home to the legendary Templars. He takes a small room at the British Hotel and proceeds to fill his head and sketchbook with memories. It is from these sketches that he will print Balcony, where he depicts a magnifying glass effect. Escher then had an intuition that would propel him much farther. He began to see the possibility of an annular distortion, not unlike the Klein bottle, a perpetual motion of sorts.
The genius of Escher was to be able to capture both universes in a closed circuit.
The young man at the forefront admires an image which includes the gallery he's in. Technically, he would be able to see himself looking at himself ad infinitum. Because the effect is continuous, the eye accepts the image. It is clear, however, that we are beyond the limits of the possible.
So much so that Escher was confronted with the impossible right there.
Escher came to the conclusion that he could not complete his drawing, as his monogram in the final sketch can attest.
I mean, in a sense, by leaving the hole blank, Escher was saying, you try to fill it then, I can't.
Thus, the void becomes an enigma, a mystery, a challenge to all of those who would dare to see it as a flaw.
Here's what the artist said about it in a letter he wrote to his son Arthur. The strange print I told you about is now completed. I dare say I haven't done anything stranger in my whole life. We see a young man in a gallery looking at a print where he is himself depicted. How can this be? Escher concludes by alluding to the fact that he may have reached the curved universe Einstein was talking about.
Who knows? There is more to relativity than what seems to exist in popular belief. In no way does it mean that any and all can claim what they wish.
Einstein had a very different view, and if you put space and time together, it then becomes an absolute notion.
Einstein's work will inspire one of Escher's pieces, appropriately titled Relativity. The artist is very careful not to tread on the most beautiful of scientific intuitions.
Perpetual movements can't end. Otherwise, a snake eating its tail would swallow its own mouth and vanish. Escher went to the limits of classical perspective. In turn, he left us a great legacy. The notion of vanishing points with curved lines. While building the structure around an imaginary cylinder. Out of his Malta travel memories, he invents an art gallery, where a series of paintings create a counterweight to a series of windowed buildings. Escher senses that this is the only way to discipline the image he envisions. The artist seems to have thought of every detail in achieving his goals for this piece. And this makes the void at the center all the more mysterious. Is it not, however, what Escher strives for in every one of his works? To fascinate us, provoke us, leaving a lasting and often haunting impression. Pure intuition drove him, faultlessly, making him an artist harder to classify than any other. In his art form, Escher is the one and only.
The emotion that Escher is expressing in his art is not one that's always felt by other people. I mean, it's the same emotion that is felt in mathematics.
Escher had an amazing intuitive sense for mathematical ideas.
Mathematicians are not the only ones looking for beauty within symmetry. All artists rely on it systematically. Tailoring a garment or even laying down wallpaper, all of these seemingly mundane activities naturally call for mirror symmetry, as do the arts of printing and engraving. The art of the Alhambra was also a great source of inspiration. He kept looking for endless ways to exploit periodic tilings with basic recognizable shapes.
He certainly was inspired after he visited the Alhambra in Spain. He went and was stimulated by the different mathematical symmetries that arise and are illustrated in the Alhambra Palace.
His studies of the tessellations of the plane proved that he had a profound insight into the geometry of the plane that very few people have ever even thought about.
All math teachers rack their brains to find ways to explain reflections, translations, rotations, and other projections. Ernst Reich was one of those math professors. Though he knew how to pique his students' interest through amusing and interesting drawings rather than completely abstract formulas, he made use of Escher's tiles. The two men eventually became friends. In fact, Escher's tiles have a lot in common with the different ways molecules can arrange and bond themselves. This becomes strikingly clear when we compare virus shells and Escher's spheres and polyhedrons. Is this chance? Or could it be another amazing unconscious intuition by an artist?
I don't see an obscure link between math and art. I see a very clear and visible link between math and art.
Escher had a great passion for creating visual puzzles, and mathematician Hendrik Lenstra is almost as passionate when it comes to tackling the most complicated puzzles.
no, beauty, that is the second most important thing in mathematics, after the validity. If it is not valid, if you have a mistake, that is a disaster.
The effect in Print Gallery is very similar to the impression of infinite images one gets from looking into facing mirrors at the barbershop. Once more, Escher tackles his profound obsession, infinity. After trying his hand at interior, exterior, cyclical, spherical, bowed, or tiled infinities, Escher is instinctively poised to attain his goal, starting with an image within an image.
The secret of one of these Droste pictures and also this Escher picture is that the inside meets the outside because there is a repetition.
These self-referenced images are commonly known as the Droste effect.
That means that there is a portion in the picture, and if you blow it up by a certain factor, it is exactly the same picture itself. The Droste effect, well, it is an image of a nurse on a package of cocoa who carries a tray, and on the tray there is this very same package showing herself. Escher's studies, essentially speaking, if you zoom into them by a factor of 256, then you see the very same picture. And that is something that is difficult to visualize, because if you have an ordinary picture, I mean, fitting on a page of paper, and you blow it up by a factor of 256, you just see nothing. You see one blot of ink. So to really visualize this, you need a very large poster. If you have 2.5 meters and you blow it up by 256, then you get a square centimeter from the middle, and then you may have a chance seeing something. But of course, a mathematician has no problem picturing such a mechanism in his mind.
Escher also had a very precise image in mind. His plan is to magnify the drawing along the sides of the frame. To achieve this, Escher designs a deformation grid that leads him step by step. Back to the start. Starting up from the young man, elements gradually become larger until they reach 4 times the original size, 4 times to the right, 4 times down, and finally 4 times coming back. Total enlargement, 4 by 4 by 4 by 4, 256.
Escher made this grid just, blood and sweat. He was working very hard on it. It took him great effort to get it straight and make it satisfy his requirements. Then you see that he glued pieces of paper on top of them, and it is drawn on transparent paper, so you can turn it back, and it is sort of a work of art in itself. And from a mathematician's point of view, it is really the grid that is interesting, and the artwork, that is for the collectors.
If we follow the picture's frame, the one that the young man is looking at, we can count all 4 sides. It is then seemingly impossible to close this frame without falling from the paper's edge or blatantly cheating.
Somehow there was a flaw in this picture, in the thing in the middle. I always felt it was a little unsatisfying.
Since the death of the artist, the Escher Foundation in Baarn sees to it that the whole of his work is preserved. Willem Veldhuizen is the current president.
I don't know if he ever tried to fill it in. That nobody knows.
If we look to the back of the grid, we can see a timid attempt at filling the center void. But this went against the rules Escher had set for himself. Men of science have often seen in Print Gallery what is known as a Riemann plan, a profoundly abstract object with a hole in its center. Other enthusiasts will see in it the portrayal of a black hole, the essence of yin and yang, or even the wave-particle duality of matter.
They saw in it as the kind of eternity. No, he has no meaning with it. He just made the print, he likes it, he put a signature in it and put a serial number in it, and that was that.
Though the central blemish seems like a defect, perhaps the defect lies in our expectations, for in fact Escher could not have completed that portion of the picture without being inconsistent with the rules by which he was drawing the picture. That center of the whirl is, and must be, incomplete.
Sealing up the debate, Douglas Hofstadter, a great admirer of Escher, used the drawing to illustrate the fact that mathematics themselves are faced with incompleteness.
Just enough, according to mathematician Kurt Gödel, to make human intuition irreplaceable. To elegantly bridge this gap between the pure artistic emotion and the most rigorous mathematical reasoning would let us delve deeply into the magical heart of human intuition. By any chance, could this be a common principle for all forms of human expression? Another more common form of chance, a simple delayed flight, would one day inspire Lenstra to seriously consider the question.
So I stared at the print and I didn't get very far, but somehow it kept irritating me. Some people say, well, it's an ugly hole, it shouldn't be there, but that was not my question. Ugly or beautiful, that is not something that a mathematician decides about. And I started wondering about something else, namely, if you try to unravel the mathematical structure of the curvature of the print, do you really run into a mathematical problem when you try to fill that hole? So in other words, it's not a question of beauty, it's a question of necessity. Can you avoid a hole, or is there a way of filling it in while sticking to Escher's own rules?
One of contemporary art's greatest enigmas stems directly from an artist's unfailing rigor. And half a century later, Hendrik Lenstra feels intuitively that some mathematical order must exist behind all of this.
I didn't have the foggiest idea what Escher's own rules were in the first place. Escher was an artist, and rules is a mathematical notion. Mathematicians are used to answering precise questions, and I was not facing a precise question. So I tried to trick myself into asking precise questions, and it took me a while before I hit upon the right question. And what I did when I was back home, when I was in Amsterdam, then I got my old Escher books from the shelf and I looked up what Bruno Ernst had to say about his print. And it was very informative. He showed all the studies that Escher had made. And the main feature of those studies, the main study, was a grid. And it was a grid with all sorts of little squares circling around and spiraling and growing and curving.
Apart from all the distortion, Escher strives to preserve small reproduction squares, a well-known artist's technique to enlarge or copy an image.
Well, it was completely clear how you would use the grid and a straight picture to make it into an Escher picture. And I started wondering what this grid represented. Clearly there was some mathematics behind it, and what was it? The grid was made in such a way that is what Bruno Ernst wrote, and he was quoting Escher really, that the little squares in the real world would, after the distortion, remain little squares. And that was the secret remark, because that is a very well-known notion in mathematics. It is called conformality, conformal transformations developed in the middle of the 19th century.
A deformed square still looks like a square, as long as its angles remain set at 90 degrees. This also occurs during a conformal transformation on an imaginary surface, where each point represents the coordinates to very strange imaginary or complex numbers.
I was looking at this question, this print, for days, and I was having all these false leads. At one moment I tried to analyze the picture, and I thought that it should be clear by reasons of symmetry that the print shown should clearly be a square print with a vanishing point in the middle, because somehow I couldn't imagine that otherwise the whole transformation would work out. And I tried to analyze the print on the basis of that hypothesis. I got absolutely nowhere. And then I thought, okay, let's verify, why does it have to be square? And then I realized that it doesn't have to be the slightest reason that it was square. So it was sort of marvelous, because the day I had the right question to ask, I also had the right answer.
With his natural enthusiasm, Hendrik Lenstra assembles a small team of colleagues and artists in the hopes of solving this 50-year-old riddle. After a careful analysis of Escher's work, the team painstakingly reconstructs a warp grid relatively similar to the one the master had created by instinct and entirely by hand.
It was, upon analyzing this grid, also very clear to me that there was also a repetition. And this repetition was achieved not just by zooming in, but by simultaneously rotating. If you would rotate it, I think almost putting it upside down. I measured it in the grid, and if you turn the grid over an angle of about 160 degrees, so that it's almost completely upside down, and at the same time you zoom in by a factor of almost 20, then you get the very same picture, at least if the picture would have continued indefinitely. And what I found very mystifying is that there was no visible relationship between this angle and the 160 degrees and the zoom in factor, the 20, and my original 256. And I wondered, what has happened to the 256? And what is the exact value of this angle? And what is the exact value of the zoom-in factor that is about 20 that makes the game work? And that was finally an exactly posed question.
We had the theory within a week when Professor Lenstra had his ideas about what the structure is of the print. But then it took us over 2 years to really make the visualization with the computer.
More often than not, mathematicians play around with abstract ideas. But this time, Lenstra's ideas were easily tested against reality. The theory looked solid.
Lenstra was convinced he was on the right track. It remained to be seen if he was right.
But even when one has the right theory, it is sometimes quite the task to redo what was just undone.
So in his own print, the picture gallery looks perfectly straight and natural. But of course, he would run into a problem if he would try to extend the print not to the inside, but to the outside.
The functions required for the mathematical interpretation of Escher's construction are much more complex than everyday addition and subtraction. In fact, these become utterly useless without the powerful computers we have today.
Well, an invertible function, it is a transformation that you can undo completely.
Escher's equation yields these results. Sketches plus grid equals lithograph. Would the reverse have been true? Does lithograph minus grid equal mystery solved? Not quite.
If you use the ideal grid, the unique one, given the choices that Escher made, that is absolutely perfectly conformal, and you use it to make the picture, as we did ourselves, then you see that the columns of the picture gallery, well, they're a little shaky. You know, Malta is in an earthquake-sensitive region, but I think that that was not the idea that Escher wished to convey.
Success once more. This drawing can indeed be unfolded. The center void then takes on a spiral shape from the heart of its frame to its edges. The unfolded result is almost identical to Escher's preliminary sketch.
The shape that comes in, this sort of spiral shape, is an equiangular spiral, basically, which is a very mathematical shape.
Le mot spirale veut dire le mouvement, qui se transforme plus petit, plus gros, puis qui continue sans une continuité, mais qui peut changer de forme aussi en montant.
L'infini, la spirale, quelque chose que tu cherches tout le temps en art, toucher l'infini avec le fini. Tu sais.
So Hans Richter was an illustrator who took the straightened pictures that we got of Escher's print gallery. So we undid Escher's transformation using his own grid paper and his own final product of print gallery. And he filled in the missing bits. And also, he straightened out some of the lines that were not completely straight.
The next step was to glue Escher's image onto this mathematical grid. But the great master's ghost had one more trick up his sleeve. In the bizarre mathematical world of the complex plane, the path towards the solution required the construction of an infinite Escherian tiling. The tiling had a double symmetry, sliding sideways corresponding to enlargement and upwards to rotation. What's more, despite all the power of a supercomputer, the gray tones of the tile were flawed.
Alors, un dessin, si on veut abstraire un peu mathématiquement, c'est décider à chaque endroit si j'ai un point noir ou un point blanc. C'est quelque chose qui dit, pour chaque nombre complexe, est-ce qu'il est noir ou blanc? Et là, c'est comme ça qu'on traduit le problème d'Escher en une manipulation de quelque chose.
Also, I computed it and I drew the picture, and it turned out that in the curved world and in the straight world, I was just looking at the very same picture, except that it was turned over about 40 degrees.
Despite elaborate calculations, gray tones still had to be corrected. The only solution? Ask an artist to do instinctively, and in a fraction of the time, what was beyond the power of the machine. The artist used his judgment, a uniquely human tool, beyond the reach of any computer.
Consciousness is simply not the product of a computation. So that computers, on the basis of their being computers, will simply not ever experience consciousness.
Yes, there was an aha moment. There was an aha moment. I sort of knew, now, in 5 seconds from now, I will draw these two logarithms and I will find myself stare at a picture that is identical to another picture that I just drew. And I thought, that was sort of something, if the whole theory would work out, that should be true. And right, I drew the point, I looked at the angle, it was indeed 90 degrees. The ratio between the two edges was indeed the ratio of 5.5 to 2 times pi. I thought, okay, I have the whole thing in my pocket.
While we're at it, what does Douglas Hofstadter think of this, 25 years later?
It looked to me as if it couldn't be completed. In a certain sense, it requires an infinite amount of stuff to finish it.
Once the process is finished, we find that it is, indeed, an image within an image, just as Escher intended. Zooming in 256 times brings us precisely back to the initial picture. An original way to appreciate Escher's feat is to picture it unraveling, as if it were the shaving from a pencil being sharpened.
I could now fill the hole in a mathematically perfect way. I did make the assumption that the transformation that he was using his grid for was going to be a conformal transformation. Once you take that step, the solution is unique and there is no way around it.
The central idea of how you would continue is implicit in a certain sense in what he was doing, but not realize it until Lenstra came and produced this very wonderful idea stimulated from Escher's print.
More recently, Professor Penrose developed a new type of paving, quasi-periodical, that was reinterpreted by a modern artist with an Escherian twist.
I think he would have enjoyed these things and done wonderful things himself if he'd had the opportunity. But my father also died at a similar time to Escher, so neither of them were able to appreciate these developments.
Here we can ask ourselves, what exactly is the role of intuition in creativity?
Ça arrive très peu souvent, mais que tu sens, ah, j'ai vraiment trouvé quelque chose. Tu te dis combien de temps je vais pouvoir en bénéficier. C'est quelque chose un peu comme un cadeau.
C'est l'origine de l'inspiration et c'est la technique. Et ça, c'est extrêmement mystérieux. Parce que s'il y avait une recette pour ça, tout le monde serait Mozart.
C'est qu'il y a quelque chose qui vient d'arriver ou qui existe, qui rentre dans ta tête ou dans ton cœur. Et c'est plus au niveau du cœur qu'au niveau de la tête, qui ne peut pas tricher.
I think the word intuition sometimes means different things to different people. It's certainly very important in science. You have a feeling of something. Something is true, and you may not be able to explain to anybody else why you have that feeling. And it may not be totally logical. Nevertheless, it could be bringing things together which you maybe perceive that other people haven't seen.
Lenstra and his team were at last ready for the great revelation. One question remains to be asked. Was Escher's decision to design his warping grid to the right arbitrary? Here again, the work done by Lenstra's team provides an answer. No, there is nothing arbitrary about this masterpiece. The computer can easily warp the drawing reconstructed by the Leiden team to the left or to the right. This results in a warped image completely void of Escher's artistic magic. The eye can't readily follow the composition lines that once helped decipher the image. They could now apply the reversed mathematical recipe. In front of the disbelieving eyes of the team, the mystery was finally yielding its secrets in all of its Escherian beauty. A drawing within a drawing.
So Lenstra saw how you essentially put the whole picture in the hole, and then you put the whole picture in that hole and keep on doing it. It goes on forever. The whole thing looks very smooth and rather mystifying because you keep thinking you're going to see what's in the middle, and it keeps on going and repeating itself.
So the problem of filling in the hole is actually equivalent to the problem of filling in the universe around the picture.
One thing remains. Escher opted not to finish his sprint. Was he right?
I think if people would have pressed him on it, I think he would have come up with something that is similar to what we did, even without the formulas, just from his graphical intuition.
Opinions vary.
Ça m'inquiète toujours les gens qui veulent terminer les travaux des artistes.
To be honest, I was a little angry because I think you should keep your fingers off an artist's print.
Well, I must say that I personally do not see this as my problem, but as a problem for artists. I'm solving a mathematical problem here. I'm not claiming that I'm producing or distorting works of art here.
It's brilliant, and you sort of wonder, why did it take so long? Because in some ways it seems so obvious, and at the same time it's so brilliant and sublime. It's wonderful.
Dus ik denk, als hij die oplossing van Lenstra had gezien, dat hij daar naar elke vriend en naar elke bekende had geschreven, nou is me toch wat overkomen. Hij zou bijzonder enthousiast geweest zijn. Hij zou, ik zou bijna zeggen, als het in zijn aard had gelegen, een gat in de lucht gesprongen hebben.
This is not only inevitable, but wonderful.
And somehow to do it in this way that Lenstra has been able to do is very impressive and very satisfying. And I think Escher would have felt the same way.
Since the imaginary warping was performed in a computerized loop, we end up with the possibility of going further. We can plunge right into the whirl, into something as fascinating as the original drawing itself. To complete this masterpiece, Escher would have required a tool far sharper than a pen could ever be. But with Print Gallery, Escher's genius had finally come closer than any other before to infinity. As I was saying, in an art gallery where snakes swallow their own tails, one has to expect the unexpected, including a most fascinating lithograph, which lacks nothing to keep it from the pantheon of mankind's most beautiful treasures. An image within an image within an image.